Hello, everyone. Welcome to this story of October Sky. This is the true story of Homer Hickam, a boy who built rockets and followed his dreams. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe, like, and share. Your support helps me make more inspiring stories for you. Homer Hickam was a teenage boy who lived in a small town named Coalwood in West Virginia, United States. The town was small, quiet, and surrounded by dark coal mines. Almost every man in Coalwood worked in the mine. The black smoke from the mine filled the sky every day. The sound of trucks and machines never stopped. The people were used to it. Coal was their life. Homer lived in a small wooden house with his family. His father, John Hickam, was the mine's superintendent. He was a serious and strong man who loved his work. Every morning, he left the house early and came home late, covered in coal dust. He didn't talk much, but when he did, everyone listened. His mother, Elsie, was calm and gentle. She liked painting pictures of a house by the sea, a dream home she wanted to live in one day, far from the mine. Homer's older brother, Jim, was tall and handsome. He played football and was very popular at school. Homer, on the other hand, was small and quiet. He didn't like sports, and he didn't want to work in the mine like his father. But in Coalwood, most boys had no other choice. When they finished school, they went to work underground. Homer often sat near the window at night, watching the mine lights and wondering if his future would be the same. One night in October 1957, everything changed. The people of Coalwood stood outside their houses and looked up at the dark sky. A small, bright light was moving slowly across the stars. Someone shouted, "It's Sputnik, the Russian satellite." Everyone watched in silence. For the first time, Homer saw something not from this world. He stayed outside long after the others went in, staring at the tiny light until it disappeared. That night, Homer couldn't sleep. He thought about the satellite and the people who made it. The next morning, he told his mother that he wanted to build a rocket. His mother smiled a little and said, "Then you should try." At school, Homer talked about rockets with his friends Roy Lee and Odell. They laughed at first, but then they said, "Let's see if it really works." Later, Homer found Quentin, a quiet boy who loved science and always carried books. Quentin agreed to help him build rockets. After school, the boys searched for old metal pipes and powder from the mine. They worked behind Homer's house, trying to make a small rocket. When they lit it, it exploded with a loud boom and scared the neighbors. Smoke filled the air, and Homer's father came running from the house. "What are you boys doing?" he shouted. "Building a rocket," Homer said. His father looked angry. "Stop this foolishness before someone gets hurt." That night, Homer sat outside again. The stars were bright above Coalwood. His hands were black from smoke, and his ears still rang from the explosion. But deep inside, he felt something new, a small fire that told him he must try again. After the first explosion, Homer didn't stop. He woke up early the next morning, still thinking about rockets. At school, he went to find Quentin, the smart boy who always carried science books. Quentin was sitting alone in the library, reading about chemistry. Homer sat beside him and said quietly, "I want to build a rocket that really flies." Quentin smiled a little. "Then we need better fuel and a real nozzle," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes looked excited. They began talking about rocket parts, about pressure, and about how to make something that could lift off the ground instead of exploding. Soon, Roy Lee and Odell joined them. Roy Lee was funny and full of energy. Odell was good at finding materials. They decided to build rockets together and called themselves the Rocket Boys. Every afternoon after school, they met behind the old coal mine to test new ideas. Their first real rocket didn't go far. It made smoke and noise, but flew only a few meters before falling. The boys laughed, but also felt disappointed. "We need to try again," Homer said. They started going to the town junkyard to find pieces of metal. Odell found small pipes and old paint cans. Quentin brought sugar and other chemicals to make better fuel. The smell of smoke and burnt powder followed them every day. Their hands were dirty. Their clothes smelled bad, but they didn't care. They were learning. One afternoon, they tested another rocket. This time it went up higher, maybe 50 meters, before falling back and breaking on the rocks. It was still not enough, but they could see progress. People from town began to notice them. Some laughed and said, "These boys are wasting time." But others started to feel curious. At home, things were not easy. Homer's father, John, didn't like the rockets at all. When Homer came home with smoke on his clothes, his father looked at him with a cold face. "You're supposed to study or help your mother, not blow things up," he said. Homer didn't argue, but inside he felt angry. He knew his father only cared about the mine. Homer's mother, Elsie, quietly watched them both. One evening, while painting her dream house by the sea, she said to Homer, "Your father loves you, but he only knows one world, the mine. You have to find your own." At school, their science teacher, Miss Riley, heard about the rockets. Instead of telling them to stop, she supported them. She gave Homer a book about rocket design and told him to read and learn. She said, "If you can learn the math, you can make your rockets fly." That night, Homer read the book under a small lamp until his eyes hurt. He didn't understand everything, but he kept reading. The next day, he drew a new design and showed it to his friends. They built it together and called it AUKI, their first named rocket. When they tested AUKI, the rocket shot up fast into the sky, leaving a long white trail. The boys jumped and shouted with joy. For the first time, their rocket didn't explode, it flew. After the success of AUKI, the Rocket Boys felt proud. They met every day after school to build new rockets. Each one flew higher than the last. They kept records of every flight, how high it went, what kind of fuel they used, and how far it landed. People in Coalwood started talking about them. Some were surprised, others laughed, and a few even came to watch their launches. But not everyone was happy. One afternoon, while they were testing another rocket, they saw black smoke rising far away near the forest. Later that evening, a police car stopped in front of Homer's house. The officer said a small forest fire had started, and someone saw smoke from the boys' rocket area. Homer tried to explain. "It wasn't us, sir. We didn't fire one today." But the officer didn't listen. He said they had to stop their rocket experiments. Homer's father heard about it and became very angry. He shouted at Homer at the dinner table. "I told you to stop this nonsense," he said. "You are bringing trouble to this family. Do you want someone to get hurt?" Homer tried to speak, but his father's voice was louder. "You'll end up in the mine anyway," his father said coldly. That night, Homer went outside and sat in the dark yard. His eyes were full of tears, but he didn't cry. He looked up at the stars and remembered Sputnik. Somewhere up there, people were sending rockets to space. Why couldn't he? The next day at school, Homer told Miss Riley everything. She listened carefully, then said, "You can't stop now. If you believe you didn't start that fire, prove it." She helped him and Quentin find a way to calculate the flight path of their rockets using math and maps. The boys spent days drawing lines and measuring distances. Finally, they showed that their rockets couldn't have reached the forest. The police had been wrong. When the truth came out, Homer's father said nothing, but Homer could see a small change in his eyes. Not pride, but maybe a little respect. The Rocket Boys went back to work. They built a safer launch site farther from town. They used stronger metal, better fuel, and wrote down every detail. Quentin taught them how to measure altitude using trigonometry. Homer didn't understand math well, but he stayed late every night to practice. One Saturday, they launched AUK-6, their biggest rocket so far. It flew straight up, high into the sky, leaving a long white trail until it disappeared. Everyone watching clapped and shouted. Even some miners came to see it. Homer's heart beat fast. He couldn't believe his eyes. But that evening, bad news came. The mine had an accident. A group of miners was trapped underground, and Homer's father went down to help them. Hours passed. The whole town waited outside in silence. Finally, his father came back, his face black from coal dust, his eyes tired and sad. Homer stood there quietly, feeling both proud and scared. Life in Coalwood was hard and dangerous, but he now knew that his future would not stay under the ground. The accident in the mine changed everything in Coalwood. For many days, the people were quiet and sad. Homer's father worked day and night to help the miners. He looked older and more tired than before. Homer wanted to help too, but he also knew his heart was not in the mine. It was still in the sky. At school, Miss Riley gave the Rocket Boys some big news. She said there would be a national science fair in the city. "You boys should join," she said. "Your rockets are good enough." Homer's eyes opened wide. Going to the science fair felt like a dream, but they had no money for travel, and their rockets were still not perfect. The boys started working harder than ever. They stayed late after school, cutting metal, mixing fuel, and writing reports. Miss Riley helped them with math and science. She always told them to believe in themselves. But soon, Miss Riley got sick. She was taken to the hospital. Homer visited her and saw her lying weak in bed, but she still smiled. "Don't stop, Homer," she whispered. "You have to go to the fair." Her words stayed in his mind. Homer promised he would win for her. The Rocket Boys built their best rocket yet, AUK-XXXI. It was tall, shiny, and carefully measured. They tested it on a cold morning. The rocket went higher than any before, maybe a few thousand feet. The sound echoed through the hills. Everyone in town came to see it. Even Homer's father stood far behind, watching quietly. When the rocket landed safely, people clapped. Homer looked at his father, but the man only nodded and walked away. Still, that small nod meant more than words. A few weeks later, Homer went alone to the science fair. It was his first time leaving Coalwood. He traveled by bus and stayed in a big city hotel. He showed his rockets, photos, and notebooks to the judges. Many students there had fancy equipment, but Homer had only what he built with his friends. Still, the judges were impressed. They asked him questions about fuel, air pressure, and altitude, and Homer answered them all with confidence. When the winners were announced, Homer heard his name. He had won first place. People clapped and took pictures. For the first time in his life, Homer felt truly proud. He called his mother, who cried with happiness. When Homer returned to Coalwood, everyone was waiting. Even the miners came out to welcome him. His father walked up slowly and shook his hand. "I'm proud of you, son," he said in a quiet voice. It was the first time he had ever said those words. Later that evening, Homer and his friends went to their launch site one last time. They set up a final rocket. The sky was clear and full of stars. Homer lit the fuse, and the rocket rose high, shining against the night sky until it disappeared. He stood there, eyes full of light, knowing this was the beginning of his real life, a life reaching toward the stars, far beyond the coal mines of Coalwood. Thank you for listening to the story of October Sky. Homer Hickam's life shows how a small dream in a small town can grow into something big. He looked at the sky and never stopped trying. If you like this story, please subscribe, like, and share it with your friends. Your support helps me tell more true and inspiring stories like this one. Keep dreaming, keep learning, and see you in the next story.